A few years ago, my niece called me to go berry picking. And I, of course, said, yes, let's go. And so we met up at our favorite berry picking spot. She brought her daughters, who brought their children, and we started picking berries. It was a wonderful time, and we sat on a log and visited for a while. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm here with my nieces and their kids and their kids. That's 4 generations of picking together in the same place that I had picked with my sister and my mother and her Aunt Mary. That's 6 generations we've picked at the same place that our ancestors have picked before. And that represents to me about 120 years. My mother was born about 100 years ago. She was born in 1922, and her auntie was born in 1904. So I put together this little string of beads to represent the generations of us who have picked in this same place. A lot of things have happened to our people in the last 120 years. And within the last 20 years, a lot of our younger people have been actively looking for sovereignty, pushing back against colonialism. So that would be from the year 2000 to the year 2020. The previous 20 years, from 1980 to the year 2000, was also an important time. During that time, the Chickaloon village, along with many other villages in Alaska, have worked to develop the services, our governmental system, and the services we provide for others. From 1980 down to 1960 was when the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act was formed in 1971. That particular law allowed our land to be transferred so that oil companies could develop oil up on the North Slope. And they needed to make a law because prior to that, they realized that the ownership of the land had never been transferred from the Native people who lived here. Before that, the time frame of 1940 to 1960 was another important time. We had epidemics of polio, there were tuberculosis happening, and a lot of people were hurt, and there were also boarding schools happening during that time. In the time frame from 1920 to 1940, the Alaska Native people experienced the loss of a lot of children who were taken forcefully from home to go to boarding schools. A lot of them never returned, and those who did return, they were changed. The language was not allowed to be spoken in the boarding schools. So that really hurt a lot of our culture. And in the previous 20 years, from the year 1900 to 1920, we were impacted by coal mining in Chickaloon, the Spanish flu in 1918. We don't know how many actually died. There are estimates of 60 to 80% of our people passed away during that time frame. And it was very painful. There were entire villages that were abandoned. There was a village in Chickaloon at that time. My ancestors survived the Spanish flu, but a lot of their friends and relatives did not survive it. Coal mining began in 1914, and so a railroad was built to Chickaloon, and coal was mined. There was a city built in Chickaloon. It had fire hydrants, a saloon, had barracks, it had a hospital, it had a school, had all kinds of activity going on out there. But shortly afterwards, they closed the coal mines. They removed the tracks, and they gave away the land to homesteaders. So after making that little strand of beads to represent my family and its current state, so I thought, well, if that represents 100 years or 120 years, what would 1,000 years look like? I know our family has been here longer than that. So I designed this little strand of beads here to represent 1,000 years. Every silver bead would represent 100 years. In 1899 was the gold rush. Now, during the gold rush, people came up here thinking they were going to find gold and strike it rich. And a lot of miners came and started interacting with our family. Prior to that, in 1867, was when the Seward's Folly event happened. And it was translated, people believed that they had purchased all of Alaska. The Russians had showed up about 280 years ago or 300 years ago, depending on which part of Alaska they showed up. And so we ended up with some diseases and problems. 400 years ago is when the Spaniards showed up, and there was the Spanish conquest, they called it, when they went to Mexico and conquered the Aztecs, or at least that's their portion of the history. Depends on who you're talking to, but it was devastating to the people in Mexico. About 530 years ago, Christopher Columbus created a lot of damage to the native people living here. So that was about 500 years ago. And if you go back to about 670 years ago was when the bubonic plague hit Europe. And then 1,000 years ago, there was what was known as the Little Ice Age. During the Little Ice Age was very devastating to a lot of the people who lived here. It got very, very cold and the glaciers advanced, and a lot of people didn't survive that time frame. So after making this little 1,000-year chain, I know that our people have been here longer than 1,000 years, so I kept going with this. I used this rope and put beads at every 1,000-year marker. Well, about 1,500 years ago was the fall of the Roman Empire. And this is the 2,000-year marker, which a lot of people are familiar with, the beginning of our calendar, the time that Jesus of Nazareth walked the earth. About 500 years prior to that, we had Buddha. So about 2,750 years ago was the beginning of the Roman Empire. About 4,000 years ago, that would be this little bead here, and that's when people started writing. And that's what they call the beginning of recorded history. 4,600 years ago, they were building pyramids in Peru. 5,000 years, 6,000 years. Now right here, this blue bead here represents 6,500 years. There have been an archaeological evidence of the Otna people here in this valley 6,500 years ago. And that's also the same time when the glacier retreated up the Matanuska River. 10,000 years ago, there's evidence of an Otna occupation here in Alaska. 12,000 years ago, farming was happening over in the Middle East, in Africa, Europe. 13,500 years ago, there was recently an archaeological find near Delta Junction in Alaska. At that archaeological find, there were mammoth bones. There's evidence of another archaeological find from 14,000 years old. That one was north of the Talkeetna Mountains. The Otna people have been here probably much longer than that, but that's the oldest scientific evidence of us being here, because the land bridge closed about 17,000 years ago. We were probably here then. So that is the timeline of how long we have been here. I go back to this little section of beads representing our family now. How long we've been here, and we've been taking care of the land the whole time. When I go out to pick berries, I like to think that the ancestors have left those berries so that I could pick them now, and so that our grandchildren could pick them now. And we are very careful still to follow their rules. They taught us, don't pick all of the berries. Take about 1/3 of them. Leave 1/3 of them for other animals, and 1/3 of them so they will regenerate and they'll come back again. We've always been here. We're always going to be here. Amen.